Right, we're going to make a rubble diorama for use in view. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the rubble and we're going to drop it onto this car. First of all, I'm going to take the rubble and I'm going to duplicate it a bunch of times by holding down the shift key and just copying and paste down by using shift to make a whole bunch of different pieces of rubble. I'm just going to rotate and scale some of these stacks down. Just keep repeating that process until I've got a lot of rubble to play with. I'm just going to again rotate that round at an angle just so that when they fall, they don't fall uniformly. Now it's important to note that you want a space between all of your objects if you're going to be using mass effects. If your objects are starting touching each other, they'll fly off in different directions, so you need to make sure there's a good space between them. So we've got a fairly decent stack of rubble there. We could go more, but just for the tutorial I'll keep it simple. I'm just going to raise them up above the height of the vehicle. I'm going to drop the vehicle underneath, and I'm going to make the rubble now a dynamic object and the car a static object. So I'm selecting all of these individual rubble pieces, and I'm now going to go to the Mass Effects tool up here, and I'm going to make them the dynamic rigid body. It's going to take 3D Studio Max a few moments just to calculate the properties for all those objects. Okay, now it's done. I'm going to select the car, back up to the Mass Effects panel up here, and I'm going to set that as a static rigid body. I'm now going to go up to the little control panel here and press play. It's going to take a minute just to calculate through the animation, but you can see it's all falling quite nicely. Goes a bit bananas at the end, but there you go. And so the rubble's doing its thing. Fairly happy with that. Actually, what I'm going to do now is just rewind. I'm going to give myself more keyframes to play with. Currently I've only got 100 set, so I'm going to just click the time configuration. I should be switched to PAL anyway, and I'm going to change this to 250 frames, so I've got much more to play with. Okay, so I'm just going to run that again, that simulation. Press play. It'll take a minute just to calculate, and it's dropping all of the rubble quite nicely. I'll just press stop. Just have a look round. Yeah, pretty happy with that. So what I want to do now is add keyframes. I want to bake all of that data so that it's actually written into keyframes. So just rewind it. I'm just going to animation and simulation Mass Effects, simulation bake all objects. And again, it'll take a minute or two depending on your system, but it's just ripping through, assigning keyframes to each and every piece of rubble so it becomes a solid written animation. Okay, now it's done. The difference between that is I don't have to simulate each time. I can just use the playback head to fast forward and rewind. What I'm looking for in that timeline is a particular point that I'm happy with to create my rubble stack. So, okay, so around frame 208. What I'm now going to do is select all of that, which brings me up a million keyframes down here. I'm going to click and drag outside and drag across all the way over and select those keyframes, right click and delete selected keys. So I've gotten rid of the animation. You can see I'm scrubbing through. The animation has gone, but the pieces of rubble stay the same. Now what I might want to do is just manually edit the position of some of these just to tweak it a little. And again, I'd usually work with a lot more rubble pieces than this, but just for the tutorial I'll just keep it simple. So I'm quite happy with that. There's a bit of a duplication there that's very obvious. I'm going to get rid of that one, just hitting delete. So let's just assume I'm happy with that. The next stage is to export it as an OBJ. Selecting GW OBJ exporter. I'm going to give it a name. I'm just going to save that, and I'm saving it as a view preset, which gives us the XY coordinates that we're looking for. I'm not going to bother with the materials because we're going to add those in view, and just click export. It's just going to rip through all those different objects there, and it's done. This is the OBJ that I exported directly from 3D Studio Max, and you can see it's created a lot of different sub-objects. Now this is great if you want to texture each and every one of them individually or give them different textures. You can, of course, select the entire thing and give it a single texture up here, or again just go through one at a time texturing each individual piece. But what you might want to do if you're creating a vast cityscape with hundreds and thousands of pieces of rubble is actually turn it into a single OBJ, so it's actually one piece that you apply a single texture to, and it's much easier to work with in that case. Back in 3D Studio Max, what I'm going to do is actually import that object that we just created again. So I'm just going to import the rubble car. You can see all the individual pieces here. What we're going to do now, though, is very important, is check the import as single mesh. I'm now going to import that. It's bringing in all the pieces. It's brought it in on its side because those are the difference in coordinates between View and 3D Studio Max. So I'll just flip it back round again so it's the right way up. And you can see there all of the pieces. I've just hit F4 so you can see the wireframe. It's a single OBJ mesh, and in some cases it's much easier to work with. It's also much easier to decimate and to create a smaller, lower res version of it later. So now what I'm going to do, now that I've done that, is go back to export, and I'm going to export it to the same place, but I'm just going to call it Rubble Car 1 Whole. And then again, keeping the same view settings, just let it run through all of the pieces, and it's done. Switching back to view, I'm now going to import that OBJ, import object, import the new one, okay, and you can see that it's an identical stack of rubble, only this time it's a single solid OBJ rather than a multi-part OBJ. Another thing you might want to do if you're bringing in a lot of these pieces is decimate the object on import. So what I'm going to do is File, Import Object, select the object, but before I click open I'm going to the import options and I'm checking decimate object on import. That brings up a little dialog, and I'm just going to slide it across to about, I don't know, halfway. It's a little bit kind of guesswork really, but I'm just going to slide it to about halfway, hit OK, and it's going to decimate that mesh as it brings it in, so we're going to have a lot less polygons to deal with. So now what we could do if we wanted to, I'm just going to delete the original high-res ones. What we could do with these is duplicate, duplicate it a whole bunch of times, and then very quickly lay those out. And there you have it. It's a quick way to make a lot of rubble in a very short space of time.